Well, thank you so much, Andy, for that. Wasn't that just fantastic? And if you enjoyed that, then make sure that you're around on Saturday nights, because we're going to be hearing from the band on Saturday nights at the concert. And that's going to be a great opportunity to put into practice what we've been thinking about over these next few days, to invite your friends to hear something about Jesus in an incredibly creative way. So do join us. Now, I'm just sitting upstairs from where Andy did that live down in the Terrace Lounge. We're here in Otford Manor in Kent, the home of Oak Hall, where Andy is based. And I'm sitting by our own foyer here in the dining room. And we've heard lots tonight, haven't we? We've heard from Lindsay, which was so encouraging. In fact, Lindsay was mentioning Michael Green earlier, and I had the privilege of working with Michael over about 10 years. And one of the things that Michael said to me when we started out was it was great to work together, because if he died halfway through a mission, I could carry on. It never happened during a mission. Tragically, of course, Michael did die a couple of years ago, but he was looking forward to being with Jesus. And he was looking forward to his rewards. But there was one occasion when I was leading a service in a church that Michael was due to preach at, when Michael was taken ill halfway through the service. And so he wasn't able to finish. And I really genuinely thought he was going to die and I was going to have to preach his sermon. And so I did have to stand in. Thankfully, on that occasion, he didn't. And he was well enough to preach by the evening service. Well, Lindsay's internet died tonight. And we were panicking because I was thinking I was going to have to do his talk as well. But I haven't had to do that. We heard from Lindsay, which was much better. But all I want to do tonight is just to pick up on a couple of things that Lindsay mentioned as we look into the next few days together. And we've got a really exciting program packed. So we hope that you're able to join us for all of the sessions and the seminars, and to be able to get as much as you can from this time together. We've always said at every FEUER conference that we need to distinguish between principles of mission and the practice of what we do in mission. And we said principles are based on the Bible, as Lindsay so helpfully shown us tonight. They are unchanging and they are authoritative. But the practice of what we do in any particular context will change depending on the context that we're in. And our challenge is to translate those biblical principles into the practice of our own particular context. And over the last 12 years of the FEUER network, it's been wonderful to see how people have taken those biblical principles of proclamation in mission and put them into practice in their own context. We've had them doing that from Belgium to Belarus, from Austria to Armenia, from Serbia to Scotland. We've been looking at how we can do mission in our particular context. In some locations, we will be in a lecture room. In other locations, we'll be in a cinema, as we've heard tonight in Romania. At other times, we might be in a coffee shop, as we'll hear tomorrow from the guys in the Balkans. Our context changes, and so our practice will have to change. And it's been wonderful to see how people have been creative in that. Now, of course, 2020 has brought a new context to all of us called a global pandemic. None of us have been in this situation before, but we've had to learn how we're going to translate the principles of mission into the context that we find ourselves in this year. The context has changed, the principles have remained, and we're going to think over the next few days about loads of ways in which we can implement these principles into the specific context that we might find ourselves in. Now, one of the things we've realized is that it's very hard to know exactly what context we're going to be in a week's time, let alone a few months' time. And so planning evangelistic events has become really difficult, hasn't it? But what I would want to suggest is that over the coming year, across Europe and indeed other parts of the world, there are potentially 3 different contexts that we might find ourselves in regard to the pandemic. We may find ourselves in a situation of lockdown. Many of us were in that situation in the spring. Some of us are going into that situation again. Indeed, here in England, we're going into another national lockdown starting tomorrow. And that places lots of restrictions on what we can do. But there is another context that we might find ourselves in, and that is what I call the socially distanced context. You're not in lockdown, but there are certain restrictions over what you can do, the maximum amount of people that you're allowed to meet with, the kind of venues that you're allowed to use, and so on. And there is some possibility of therefore being able to meet in such a context, but you have to work out what you'll be able to do, because there are lots of things, of course, that you can't. And then a third context that you might find yourselves in is what I've called normal life. And if you're lucky enough to be living in a country like New Zealand, you might be facing some degree of normal life at the moment. And other countries that have taken a lesser approach to restrictions, perhaps like Belarus, also have enjoyed certain freedoms that other people haven't in regard to what we can do when it comes to mission. And there's a chance that over the coming year, any of us might find ourselves in one of those three contexts, and it might change at a moment's notice. But what we want to say and show you over the next few days is that whatever context you find yourself in, whether it's a lockdown context, whether it's socially distanced, or whether it's normal life, there are opportunities to publicly proclaim the gospel to students in all of those contexts. Tonight, we've heard stories from Moldova and Romania, and weren't that incredibly encouraging, hearing about how the gospel went out. And they're what we might call normal life contexts. Those were missions that happened before COVID hit. And they give us great examples of the kind of creative stuff that you can do in that particular context. Tomorrow, though, we're going to be hearing loads of stories about what student groups have been doing during lockdown. Some of them more recently from the last few weeks, but some of them also from the springtime when we went into that for the first time. And they're going to be really encouraging because we're going to hear about how people have creatively used the internet and online resources to reach people for the gospel. And there are some thrilling stories that we hope that you can join us to hear about tomorrow, which we think will give you ideas that you can implement potentially if you're in that situation at the moment. We're also later in our time together on Friday and then Saturday going to be thinking about what we might do in a socially distanced context. God willing, I'll be going to Portugal in a few days' time, and they've got missions planned in person. There's lots of restrictions about what they can and can't do, but they're doing something in person next week. And we're going to be hearing about what they're doing and hearing stories about what other people have already done in the earlier part of this term. What we really want to say is this. In the current global pandemic, there are lots and lots of things that we can't do. But the temptation is to focus on what we can't do. And we want to encourage you to focus on what we can do, to focus on the opportunities that are there. Yes, there are many challenges, and we're very aware of them. But there are also incredible opportunities. I just want to suggest two of the opportunities that this has brought about. In the lockdown times that we have found ourselves in, the opportunity that presents us is the fact that many people have little to do. And if we can make things happen, either online or wonderfully in person, they will be incredibly attractive. Normally, we have to compete with all sorts of other exciting things that are going on in people's lives. But at a time in people's lives where there is very little going on, there is a wonderful opportunity to invite people to engage with the gospel. Let's start on Saturday night by inviting people to the concerts. But also, I want to suggest that the global pandemic has made people ask some big existential questions that we haven't asked maybe before. And it certainly made people think more deeply about life in a way that perhaps they haven't before. So if we can start to tap into some of those existential questions, there's an opportunity, as we heard earlier, to bridge from where people are right now to ultimately the Lord Jesus and the heart of the gospel, the death and the resurrection of Christ. We can talk about people's concerns for the future, the lack of security that we feel in our lives, the fear of death, which is maybe paralyzing the way that we go about our lives at the moment. All of these things can be a window and a bridge by which we can bring people to hear something of the gospel. So there aren't many challenges, but there are many opportunities. And we hope that over these few days together, you will be encouraged and excited and equipped to be able to make the most of the opportunities of 2020. And that over the coming months, rather than just seeing the challenges, we'll see the opportunities and we'll want to make the most of them. So we look forward to being with you over the course of this weekend, but I'm going to hand back to Monty as we wrap up for tonight.